Here is the part of the story that nobody has ever really tried to tell you. There is a particular night in the year 180 inside a Roman military camp somewhere along the Danube frontier, where a man who had been emperor of the known world for almost 20 years sat down on the edge of his own cot and quietly understood that his body had finally lost the war. His mind had refused to give up. He was 58 years old. His name was Marcus Aurelius. He had fought a war he did not start alone for almost a decade. He had outlived most of his generals, most of his friends, at least 3 of his children, and the loyalty of most of the people he had once trusted with the empire. He had held the line of Western civilization together long past the point where most men would have already broken. He had written 12 books of private meditations about how to live even when life is unbearable, and now, on the very last pages of the very last book, he sat with one final task remaining. Not the empire, not the war, not the political assassination attempt his wife had quietly engineered, not even the son whose incompetence he had watched grow worse year after year. The only task remaining was to write his final words to himself about what it actually means to die, about what actually matters in a life that has been stripped down to almost nothing, about what he would leave behind in the silence once the oil lamp inside his tent finally went out. And here is the part the history books skip. The night he died, Marcus Aurelius did not give a speech. He did not leave behind a final proclamation. He did not deliver a polished address to the Senate. What he left behind was the very last entries of those quiet private journals, the very last pages of the very private book no one was supposed to read, the book he had been writing for almost a decade on cold nights in a war camp, far from everyone he ever loved, for no audience other than his own becoming silent mind. And on those last pages, the very last words he scratched into wax before his hands stopped moving entirely, there were 5 things he pressed into the silence like a man who knew he had used up most of his life trying, and who now only had a few hours left to leave behind the exact truths that had finally, at the very end, set him free. That is what we are going to sit with tonight. Not the empire, not the wars, not the politics, not the legend. The actual last things the most powerful man in the world quietly said to himself about how to live, right before the war inside his own body quietly ended. And if these last things were strong enough to give an emperor peace as he lay dying on the edge of an empire, then they will be strong enough to give you peace in the middle of whatever empire you are currently trying to survive. The first thing Marcus Aurelius pressed into his final night was a brutal truth about time. He did not write about death as an event. He wrote about death as the fact that most of your time is already gone. He wrote that the object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding yourself in the ranks of the insane. He wrote that you should not act as though you had 10,000 years to throw away. He did not write that line on the night he died. He wrote it back when he still had years. But the line belonged to those final hours anyway, because the realization hiding inside it was the same one that was now collapsing his world. Every day that rises for you will be the last of your life. The hour which you now waste on grief, on envy, on chasing approval from people who will forget your face within 5 years, on building a version of yourself for a camera that will not exist tomorrow, on softening yourself for someone who has already spent your worth. Every hour you waste like that is an hour the dying man you are today would have begged for. Marcus Aurelius did not know exactly when he would die. No one ever does. But by the end, he understood what he had not understood at 20, what he had barely understood at 40. what he had finally understood only when the body began to betray him. The understanding was this: time is the only currency you actually have, and you have been spending it like someone who believes they own a mint. They do not. The mint is closing, and the final hours, when they arrive for you, will shock you with how little of the time you ever really used. And that is the first brutal thing Marcus Aurelius said before he died. Stop telling yourself that you have time. You do not. You never did. And the only way to honor a man who spent his last night realizing this is to stop waiting for the perfect version of your life to begin before you finally start living it. The perfect version does not exist. The current version does. And the current version is leaving. The second thing Marcus Aurelius pressed into that final silence was even darker, and almost no one wants to hear it. He wrote, and this was reflected in the very last pages of the Meditations, that most of the things we say and do are not essential, and that if you eliminate them, you will have more time and less disturbance. He did not write this on a healthy afternoon. He wrote it as he felt the illness he had been ignoring for months finally pulling him into the same darkness that had already taken his generals, his closest friends, his legions. He was laying on his side, probably, while writing it. And the realization he pressed into those pages was the most painful and the most liberating realization he had ever reached in his entire life. Almost everything you are currently stressed about is something that will not matter within 10 years. Almost everything you are currently anxious about is something you will not even remember in detail within 10 months. Almost everything you are currently chasing, performing, proving, defending, attacking, protecting, and resenting is something you would let go of instantly if a doctor told you that you had 6 months left to live. Marcus Aurelius was being given that exact information in real time. And so the second truth he pressed into his final silence was this: stop giving your precious remaining time to anything that would not matter if you knew you were dying. Stop giving your attention to anyone who would not show up at your funeral. Stop giving your loyalty to anyone who would not spend a single sleepless night wondering how you are doing. Stop spending the hours inside your own one and only life performing for the audience of people who will not even remember your face when you are gone. The hours that remain are too few for that. They were always too few for that. And the second brutal truth Marcus Aurelius said before he died was simply this: almost everything you have been doing is dispensable. Strip it back. Keep only what is real. Keep only what is yours. Keep only what would still matter if it were your very last year. The third thing Marcus Aurelius pressed into his final silence is the one that has haunted philosophers for almost 2,000 years, and it is this. He wrote that the soul becomes dyed by the color of its thoughts. He wrote that you should fill your mind with whatever thoughts are true, whatever thoughts are noble, whatever thoughts are just, whatever thoughts are pure, whatever thoughts are lovely, whatever thoughts are admirable, whatever thoughts are excellent, whatever thoughts are praiseworthy. And he did not write that on a healthy afternoon. He wrote it in the middle of an empire collapsing, a friend dying, a war going horribly wrong, on a body that was itself collapsing in real time. He wrote it because he had finally seen with absolute clarity that the only thing he still had full control over as he lay dying was the quality of the thoughts circulating inside his own mind. Roman generals could still betray him. Roman politics could still collapse. Roman doctors could still fail to save him. The empire itself could already be quietly falling apart. But the thoughts inside his head, the interpretation of those events, the choice of whether to curse or grieve or crumble or withdraw or rage or accept, those thoughts remained his. They remained the last ground his feet still stood on. And that is the third brutal thing Marcus Aurelius pressed into the silence before he died. The world will not give you peace. People will not give you peace. Empires will not give you peace. Success will not give you peace. Fame will not give you peace. The dying will not give you peace. The only place peace has ever lived is inside the small private space between your ears. And if you do not learn to govern that small private space while you are still alive, you will die surrounded by every possible comfort and still not have it. Marcus Aurelius spent his last hours protected by the medical care of an empire, by the loyalty of his personal guard, by the wealth of half the known world, and none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the quality of his thoughts. So stop waiting for the world to soften. Stop waiting for people to change. Stop waiting for the conditions of your life to become peaceful before you become peaceful. You are the weather. You always have been. The empire cannot save you. The job cannot save you. The family cannot save you. The body cannot save you. Only the small private practice of mind can save you. And Marcus Aurelius knew that until the very last breath. The fourth thing Marcus Aurelius pressed into his final silence is one that almost no empire in history has ever been willing to admit. He wrote that he had learned from his predecessors on the throne that the man who puts an end to his own empire first puts an end to himself. He wrote it almost casually in the middle of a normal meditation entry, but it reads 2,000 years later like the most honest thing ever written by a man holding power. He was saying that the empire had been killing him. He was saying that the only way to survive the empire was to quietly stop carrying the empire inside his own nervous system. He was saying that a man consumed by his empire is already dead in every way except the biological one. The empire does not need him. The empire does not even need to know he is alive. The empire will survive the loss of his body. But his body will not survive the loss of his body if he keeps pouring his nervous system into it. And here is the brutal truth hiding inside that realization. The truth Marcus Aurelius pressed into his final silence. The truth that is not just for emperors, but is for any human being currently holding an impossible job, an impossible family, an impossible relationship, an impossible inner identity. You are not required to carry everything that is currently inside you. You are not required to carry every loyalty that was forced on you in childhood. You are not required to carry a wound simply because the wound happened to you. You are not required to carry an empire simply because you were born close enough to one. The empire will be fine without you inside it. And the only chance you have of surviving it is to put it down. Quietly tonight, decide what you are still going to carry. Decide what you are going to release. Decide what you are not going to let the dying and the living and the disappointed and the demanding put back into your arms the moment you mistakenly reach out for them. The fourth brutal thing Marcus Aurelius said before he died was simply this: the empire you are carrying is killing you, and you do not have to die with it inside your arms. You can, right now, before your own empire becomes the cot you die on, put it down. And the fifth thing Marcus Aurelius pressed into his final silence is the one that breaks most people open completely. It is not a sentence. It is a tone. It is the tone of a man who has reached the very last page of his final notebook and is no longer writing for the next day, because there is no next day. And the tone of that final meditation is quiet. It is strange. It is almost eerily peaceful. It does not sound like a man panicking. It does not sound like a man raging against the unfairness of his death. It does not sound like a man bargaining with the gods. It sounds like a man who has finally, after everything, arrived at a private stillness so complete that it cannot be disturbed by the simple fact that his body is about to stop, and the secret that Marcus Aurelius pressed into that final stillness, the secret that took him an entire imperial life to finally earn, the secret that he left behind in those last scratched lines for anyone in any century who was honestly willing to receive it, was this: he had made peace with the fact that his work was done. He had made peace with the fact that his time was up. He had made peace with the fact that the empire would go on without him, badly or well, and that it was not actually his job to control what happened after he stopped breathing. He had made peace with the very big, very quiet, very private truth that the only thing he was ever actually responsible for was the quality of his own mind during his own small, finite, unrepeatable life. And once that responsibility was properly held, there was nothing else to be afraid of. There was nothing else to carry. There was nothing else to defend. There was nothing else to prove. There was nothing else to chase. There was only the small private practice of being honest with himself until his last breath, and then letting that breath go. And that is the final lesson Marcus Aurelius pressed into the silence before he died. The empire will not save you. The people will not save you. The success will not save you. The body will not save you. The only thing that will save you is the small private practice of being honest with yourself while you still have time to do it. And the day to begin that practice is not tomorrow. It is not after you have saved more money. It is not after you have been approved by the right people. It is not after you have proven your worth to the assembly of critics you have already allowed to live rent-free inside your own skull for too many years. The day to begin that practice was always today. Today was always the only day. And the man who wrote these final words while being emperor of the entire known world was quietly admitting he had spent too many of his own days not beginning that practice. He was quietly admitting on his deathbed that he wished he had started earlier. He was wishing in the soft, lonely dark of his own final night that he had stopped performing for Rome sooner, that he had stopped feeding the noise sooner, that he had stopped defending the wrong wars sooner, that he had stopped losing his nervous system to the ungrateful sooner, that he had stopped waiting to be understood sooner, that he had stopped feeding the empire sooner, that he had done the quiet, honest work with no audience in the dark sooner. That is the final lesson Marcus Aurelius left behind. And the only question tonight is whether you are going to honor it by finally beginning the quiet, honest work on yourself, or whether you are going to keep waiting for some future version of your life to begin before you allow yourself the dignity of beginning it. Marcus Aurelius died on the 17th of March in the year 180. He died alone in a tent. He died without a parade. He died without applause. He died without the people he had protected ever even knowing what he had endured on their behalf. He died in the same silence he had written into for almost a decade, and the only thing that survived the silence was the truth he had finally been brave enough to commit to wax. The hour is almost up. The lantern will go out. The empire will not follow you into the next room. Only the small private practice of mind will follow you into the next room. And the small private practice of mind is the only thing you have ever actually owned. So tonight, with the cold honesty of a man who finally realized he was out of time, stop carrying anything that is killing you. Stop feeding anything that is breaking you. Stop performing for anyone who would not even bother to attend the kind of funeral you would attend for them. Fill your mind only with what is true. Fill your hours only with what is real. Spend your life only with what is honest. And then, when the inevitable hour finally arrives for each of us, the way it arrived for Marcus Aurelius in a tent on the edge of an empire he was tired of holding, You will know the same quiet thing he finally knew. You will know that you did, in the end, live honestly. And that will be enough. That will be the only victory the world cannot take from you.